You have found the Reflection Podcast, and this is produced by St. Matthew Lutheran in Hawthorne Woods, Illinois. You can go to our website at stmats.net to find out more about us, and I'll have some more information at the end of today's episode. On the Reflection Podcast, I have conversations with people who are uniquely gifted by God to reflect His light and His love in this very dark world. And the reason I do that is so that you can be inspired and find out how God wants to use you to reflect His light and love. So let's get to it and see who's in the pastor's office with me today on this episode of the Reflection Podcast. In the pastor's office with me is Patrick Ferry. Welcome, Pat. Really good to see you again.
Nice to see you, Ed. Neither of us in bow ties today, but
That's exactly right. And you're going to find out a little bit about that as we have this conversation of where Pat and I actually cross paths in the church. He is a church worker along with me in what we call the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, although I know that a lot of people that are not Missouri Synod Lutherans do watch and listen to the podcast, and so thankful for you too. But let's get right into it. Pat, why don't you give us a little bit of biography of yourself, introduce yourself to us.
well, sure. And thanks, Ed, for conversation today. I look forward to it very much. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'm a retired pastor. I grew up in Colorado. I was actually didn't come from the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. You mentioned our denominational affiliation. I really grew up in an unchurched family, wonderful family, just outside of Denver. Still a loyal Bronco fan, although it's been tough sledding lately. But anyway, great childhood, great friends, brothers, sister. But I went to a Lutheran college in Kansas, a little school called St. John's College. And I went there to play college basketball. It was the only school in all of America that recognized my ability, was going to let me play in college. But I should have known at that point that I was going to be on the worst team in the history of collegiate sports. It was a transformational experience there, and it's a Lutheran school, and I came to faith in a profoundly significant way. I was baptized and soon confirmed, and then from there went to seminary after a few years helping in recruitment at St. John's. So went to seminary, graduated, didn't go right into parish ministry. I went to graduate school back in Colorado to study history, and I did my master's and PhD at the University of Colorado in Boulder in Renaissance Reformation era. That's my field of research. I spent a couple of years in Wyoming during that, and kind of after that as a campus pastor in Laramie at UW, and then I had the call to come and teach, which is what I was eager to do at Concordia University, Wisconsin, and that's where we met, of course. But taught for 6 years in the classroom, and then at the ripe old age of 38, I was elected president of Concordia, and served in that capacity for 24 years before retiring, and now living most of the year, about 2/3 of the year, here in just outside of Austin, Texas, where I have one of my children, and her husband, and 4 of our grandchildren are here. And then we spend the rest of the year now in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where we have a place for the summer months to escape Texas.
Yeah, we did cross paths at Concordia, or when you were at Concordia. I was a parish pastor in Wisconsin at the time, although I am also an alum of Concordia, Wisconsin, graduating way back in the 80s. So we won't talk about how far away that was.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting path that you took to get to that point, to be a university president in a denomination that you didn't even start out in. And I think that that brought a new perspective to us in the lifelong Missouri Synod Lutherans, to bring that from sort of the outside, although you weren't, God knew exactly what He was doing when He brought you there. And during your time at Concordia, wonderful things happened. God certainly used you and many other people to really grow the university and to become a beacon of education, quality higher education, not only in the Missouri Synod, but also in the state of Wisconsin. I know that they have reached a pinnacle of success. I believe the top school for nursing in the state of Wisconsin, and business as well, and of course spiritual formation. There was a lot of guys like me who went through pre-sem at Concordia and then went to the seminaries to become pastors. When you were at Concordia, what were some of those challenges that you faced that maybe you really didn't understand what you were getting into when you first started out on this path of higher education? What are some of those things that kind of surprised you about being at Concordia?
Well, they changed over time, obviously. There were lots of interesting challenges in higher education and higher education administration for sure. Uh, I thought toward the end it was a very we were sort of caught in the middle of some of the things that we're experiencing right now in the world around us, in this kind of sort of culture war reality, where we were very solid Lutheran Christian institution, right, and very principled perspective. But at the same time, as you said, reaching out to all kinds of people and all kinds of constituents, right? We had those pre-seminary students like you were, who grew up in the faith and were pursuing a career in church vocation. But we had students who came to study healthcare or business or to participate in athletics on a much better basketball team or football team than the one I was on, and who had no church background, not unlike my own, right? So I think a particular sensitivity to that reality, and I wanted in every way for that experience to be a positive one for all of those students, one that enriched the faith of those who brought it with them, that gave opportunity for those who had never encountered Jesus to meet him in the classroom or on the athletic field or on the drama stage. And so, but it became more and more of a tightrope walk. It seemed like, with on the one side, the popular culture becoming increasingly antagonistic to a principled Christian confession, and then even with our own church denomination, this kind of reactionary perspective that was not necessarily open to this expanded kind of vision for ministry, that felt like our schools should be mainly Lutheran schools for Lutheran students, and particularly for those who wanted to study church work. So I've learned to walk that tightrope. I mean, I had a lot of experience with it, and I think it was, as you said, and I think others too. It was a great run, and I really think that the Lord blessed that time in extraordinary ways.
He did, and it's interesting in a lot of different ways throughout the church at large. We have that tension of our history, our traditions, which are very important to
Yeah.
us and very important, uh, but struggling in the tension of being in a 21st century world that is, as you mentioned, increasingly antagonistic to Christianity and the faith and God, and having our eyes opened to being in the world but not really of the world, I think is so very important today.
Yeah.
And that's why I do the podcast too. It is to help people see that you can actually be a person of faith in this world. It's getting darker as time goes on, and um, I don't know why it seems like it's more now today, but maybe as a historian, you probably can help me understand. It's really not any
No,
different than it really was.
no, indeed. I mean, there was a time, of course, in American history where, not so long ago in living memory for me, that the church was kind of the home team, right? That's the way one of my colleagues, who was formerly the president of Wheaton College, put it. We're no longer the home team, right? It's more of an antagonistic relationship. But I'm not so sure that times are any darker than they've been throughout history. Um, where we make the mistake sometimes, particularly in a denomination like ours that really stands on the shoulders of great heroes of faith and extraordinary traditions and kind of wariness of gimmicks and fads and so forth, is that we become so rooted though in the past that we don't recognize that Luther's moment, for example, it's not our moment, right? This is our moment. This is our time. This is our place. And to move forward, standing on their shoulders, but not looking back over our shoulder in a way that causes us to be disconnected from the world around us in a meaningful way.
I've often said when I'm out in the front of the church after a worship service, and some of the young ones are running around, and they're looking behind them as they run, and I'll kind of grab them or try to stop them and says, "Look where you're going, not where you've been."
Yeah, for sure.
Where you come from is very important, but we have to be looking ahead as well. Otherwise, we'll run into walls, and that's usually something bad happens when you do that.
I'm a runner, I use this illustration a lot. So I just ran the Berlin Marathon last month, but in any case, I'm an old guy, but I still keep at it. But I use this illustration about how there's this fellow who holds the record for running a marathon distance in 3 hours, 38 minutes, which is pretty fast, faster than I ran the Berlin Marathon, faster than I ran, but he ran it backward. So
oh my goodness.
He ran the whole thing backward, much faster than I ran it forward. And I joke, sort of half kiddingly, that this guy is not only German himself, but probably Lutheran, because Lutherans spend so much time moving forward, looking backward,
right.
And how much, we don't want to be constantly looking over our shoulder. Like you tell the children, look where you're going, look where you're going.
Yeah, I like to look ahead, but like you said, we're standing on shoulders of giants.
Yeah.
And we need to acknowledge their contribution to this. But yeah,
sure.
This is our time.
This is our time. For such a time as this, Lord has placed us in this moment.
So you retired from that. What is it that you're doing all these days now with your time?
Yeah, it's been a little mixture of things since that time. Right now, I've just come from Germany, not only running the Berlin Marathon, but I spent 8 weeks doing an interim pastorate in Frankfurt, Germany, at an expat church there. So it was good. Just kind of things like that. I'm on a board in Uruguay. I'm getting ready to travel there. A Lutheran school, K-12 school with interest in establishing higher ed. But honestly, I have some time. I do have time, and I guess that's one of the things that you hope for in retirement. I don't want to be. That's part of the freedom that you want to be able to kind of pick and choose. And we move around a bit. We have 5 kids all over the country, so we want to spend time with our children, our grandchildren. It's all pretty good. Yeah.
So let's go back a little bit. You kind of you talked about how you grew up in basically an unchurched home, or maybe an underchurched home, and then went to a Lutheran college. How did you know you had a calling from God, both to be his child, but then to go into professional church work?
Yeah, that experience at St. John's College was certainly, as I said, profoundly formative for me. The kids that I encountered there who became my friends, they were like me, in just about every way. They would listen to the same music, wore the same kind of strange clothes in the late 70s, but most of them had a dimension in their lives that I just simply lacked in my own, this kind of spiritual dimension. It's not that I was an unspiritual person, but it was that they had a kind of response for that in a meaningful way, that they were able to sometimes communicate verbally, sometimes just to live out in their lives. And clearly the interaction with the faculty was much different than anything I'd experienced previously. The way that they integrated faith and learning in subjects where I never would have imagined that the thing would cross. And they were very influential, and perhaps at a time when I was looking for something anyway, just didn't have an unhappy childhood in any way, but it was just like, that's why I liked higher ed so much, because young people are leaving home, they're leaving their families, they're making big decisions about their lives, right? What am I going to do? Or maybe who am I going to marry? Or where am I going to live? So it's a very formative time. It's very much that way for me. but I clearly sense the spirit at work in that first year and in the time that followed. And there were people who spoke to me directly. I recall one neighborhood person who pulled me aside once and said, I really think you ought to think about being a pastor. Well, that hadn't crossed my mind at all up to that point. But then I thought about it, and I think, when you say that to a young person, or if any of your parishioners say that to a young person, it has a bigger impact, I suppose, than we would ever realize, that you're really planting a seed. But when someone's told, I think you'd be good at something like this, the Spirit can work through that encounter, and did certainly for me.
So as you go through that, you were at St. John's in Kansas, and then you went into um, one of our seminaries, and
Right.
then you went into the public sector, public school in Colorado. What are some of the differences between maybe a St. John's and a University of Colorado?
Well, I mean, in some ways, it's just like night and day, especially coming right from the seminary to graduate education. And both, by the way, I think were very powerfully formative. So some would like me to say that, the kind of the evils of public school education, higher level. That wasn't my experience at all. I mean, it was really sharpened my thinking and helped me to write better and to research effectively and to be challenged in really significant ways. So both were very positive experiences, but very different ones. And uh, I guess I would summarize it sort of like this: at the seminary, we weren't given every possible scenario that we're going to face in ministry, but we were taught to think theologically, right? And that's important. I mean, it's really significant. But in graduate school, I was taught also to think like a historian, like a scholar, and it's really kind of that blend of things that provides filters for how I assess my own experience and what's going on around me.
The formative years you've gone through, and then you're in higher education, and you're getting ready for the world out there. Or maybe what I'm looking for is
Mhm.
you went through some challenges in your life, and can you I don't want to dig deep, and put you on the spot or anything like that, but how did your faith in Christ get you through those challenges?
Oh, well, sure. I mean, everybody has something, and I had my share as well. Um, but without that kind of foundation, even as a young person new to the faith, it became difficult for me to understand how a person could navigate through whatever those struggles might be. Now, I suppose up to that point, again, my growing up years, can't really look at anything that said this was earth shaking, although, as an adolescent, everything's earth shaking or what have you. But then you start to face real ones, real life challenges, whatever those might be. And to have this kind of foundation is, I mean, it's just hard for me to reckon how else I would be able to navigate that. I mean, just thrown upon my own resources or what have you. I mean, it's not to say that there aren't coping skills or all kinds of things that can help people, but for me, that faith in Christ is really the only way to do it. And it's not always just like some kind of deep emotional or psychological. Like 2 years ago, for example, that I tripped one step going into my daughter's basement and tore my quad tendon right off my right knee. I mean, my kneecap's dangling, and I'm a runner, right? So it's a big deal to me, and it just completely wiped me out for months. The rehab, the work that it took, and it was physically taxing. It was quite challenging, but again, it's whether it's a physical challenge or you have to I mean, your identity is finally in Christ, right? It's not in anything else. And you work your way through it. Would I be able to run again? Well, in about a year I did, and 2 years later I ran the Berlin Marathon. Well, so you work at it, and and say Paul talks about this. He says sufferings produce character endurance, and all. So there is progression. These sufferings are not meaningless. They're whatever they might be. And we sometimes may have the impression that these would drive us away from God, but that's just the opposite of their intention, right? They God uses those to draw us nearer to Him, to shape us, form us, mold us, and to strengthen us in our faith.
We can't reflect unless there's some darkness in there. I think is an incredible truth, because I've heard it over and over again as a parish pastor when I'm sitting with families that are grieving the death of someone that they love, whether it's a parent or a child or someone their own age.
Hmm.
And they so many times I've heard it said, I don't know how people who don't have faith in Christ get through something like that.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it doesn't turn their faith off. It turns it even stronger towards Christ. And that's why I like to get that question in there, because
Yeah.
I think it can be incredibly powerful for people who realize this world is not a fun place sometimes. And
Oh, no, no, no. And I think the more that we try to create sort of our own heaven on earth experience, the more we delude ourselves into this is a broken world, and the jagged edges cut and wound and injure, and we can't avoid those, right? I mean, we just simply can't and won't, and try as we may. It doesn't mean we go looking for sufferings or struggles or crosses to bear, but they come. Invariably, they come. And so where do you look in the hour of deepest need?
that's right. You mentioned you were in Germany and you ran in the marathon there. What's the difference? You've been in the church there in Germany, and what's the difference between the German church and the American church? What have you found that's somewhat different?
Well, this was an expat church, so there were Americans who were there, and there were a fair number of people who are from India or South Asia who were Christians, and then there were some German folks and lots of visitors each week. The one thing I guess that linked to them all, besides common faith, was that this was in English, and it wasn't everybody's first language. It was often their second or third language. So, but that's we worshipped in English, and it was interesting. So maybe there was one thing that struck me a lot. I mean, that was the children, the little ones, the confirmands. They were just really sharp and they were focused and they were attentive and they were engaged. I've got some grandkids. They're great kids, and once in a while they really surprise me. But it just seems like the kids that I've encountered, little kids, even high school kids. I've worked with some high school kids here in Texas for a while, and even college freshmen did not have not exhibited the same kind of zeroing in that even in children's messages, little ones were kind of challenging me on things that I was very pleased about that. So, and that's not meant to be too sharp of a criticism of our young people, but at least the kids who were part of Trinity in Frankfurt truly impressed me. And then again, this is a congregation that represents what we'll experience in heaven, right? You have people of every tribe and race, and you don't see that in many of our congregations, right? You see a very specific sort of demographic that wasn't, and it's not being critical of it. It's just that our reality. We're an older, mainly white denomination, and this was not that. This was a much broader congregation.
Did you find in Germany uh, outside of the church, just the general population, is it much different from America, or is it much different than the Germany that we might have read about or studied in history?
Yeah, that's a good question. Even 8 weeks, you can only get a kind of preliminary sort of impression of that. But I Germany, the Germans have been through a lot, right? They've been through. The Europeans are still going through. They have a much different kind of experience than we do. dating back, of course, to World War II and even before that, and subsequently after, the East German, West German divide, and they still kind of wrestle with those issues in many ways. But the people are genuinely friendly. Europe in general is I don't know if I would call it antagonistic toward Christianity. Maybe that would be accurate, but for a strong majority of Germans, Christianity and the Europeans, Christianity is just sort of a museum piece, right? Churches are basically museums, and we have real struggles. They're sort of post-Christian reality at this point, and so a great mission field.
I've heard it said that Europe is where America is headed, where the Europeans are now. We're just a few years, maybe generation behind them of those challenges that are out there. I mean, I can remember when I was in school in the 80s, and then early on in my parish ministry, talking with people who knew about Europe, pre-communism and then communism, and how all those churches really literally turned into museums.
Yeah, literally.
And didn't and were no longer churches. Like some of the churches in the Soviet Union were actually gymnasiums now, and the swimming pools.
Right. Well, and most of the people I encountered were the people from the congregation. So there was a very high level of Christian spirituality and commitment to the faith. But I think in general that would be very different from than what most people's experiences there.
So let me shift a little bit of focus. You talked about how some people influenced you throughout your life. Can you tell us a little bit about some role models that you might have, people that you looked up to that were influential, and how they did influence you directly?
Well, there's one person above all, I think, that I would mention. I'm looking at his picture right now as we sit here. He's my wife's father, John Saleska. Some folks of my vintage will know him because he was seminary professor for 20 some years. Before that, he was on the faculty at St. John's College, and that's where I encountered him. I knew him before I knew his daughter, by the way, and he was one of those professors who brought faith and learning in a way that just kind of overwhelmed and overpowered me, and in a delightfully friendly and joyous way. He told jokes, and he memorized scripture, but above everything else, Christ was at the center of really everything that he taught and preached and lived. And he was a deeply influential person in my life, and so grateful for him. His son now teaches at our seminary in St. Louis, and I think is having no doubt similar impact on another generation of pastors.
So thankful for that. I know the name. It's hard to be a parish pastor in the Missouri Synod to not know these names.
Sure, exactly.
We do encounter them quite a bit. So you were a teacher. You're a pastor. You were an administrator. How do you encourage others to reflect God's love? What are some of the ways that you have seen in people that, I can encourage that? And how did you do that?
Well, that's a good question. It's an important one. I'm so grateful that in my own family, that my younger sister followed me to St. John's College, and then she was baptized and confirmed, very active in her faith in her church now. My mother went through confirmation instruction when I was back in Colorado. I was also an assistant pastor for a couple of years, and so she was confirmed. My brothers. I actually had my father in my confirmation class. You think about preachers' kids and how challenging they can be sometimes. PKs. Try having your own dad in your confirmation class. He was an ornery guy, but so that was and I guess in that case, it was probably as much as anything that they saw this big change in my life and were interested in it. And I'm not suggesting that that I had any particular uh, skill or ability or in that case. But to your question, this I think is really important in our time when we're thinking about what we've just described, this kind of antagonistic Christian antagonism in the culture toward Christianity these days. Our inclination, I think, as Christians, is to kind of get our hackles up, to go into sort of defense mode, to react, and and the problem often becomes people outside of our faith get a really good idea quickly of what we're against. But the essence of Christianity is not what we're against. It's who we're for, right? It's or better than that, the one who is for us. It's about directing people to Jesus. All kinds of people in all kinds of situations and circumstances. Broken people struggling, wrestling with all kinds of issues. And Jesus welcomed them all, he reached out to all of them. And I think we make a really big mistake when we engage in these culture wars in such a way that people only see that as if that were the essence of Christianity. I'm really quite concerned about that.
And I think rightly so. I think that, and I didn't, in full disclosure for our audience, I did send Pat the questions ahead of time, just so you could gather your thoughts. And this is actually, I do have a question that's not really wasn't part of that, but I have asked other guests as well, about the future of the church. What is it that we can do? What should we do as a church? I'm not really talking about, congregation or parish or even a denomination, but the Christian church today. What is it that we should be? You mentioned we need to be for something rather than known as against something.
Yeah.
What can we do?
Well, not despair, first of all. I mean, it's still the Lord's church, and He's at work in us and through us at this time. And the church remains His bride without fault or blemish or blame in the blood of Christ. As we sit here today, Ed, we are on the eve of the presidential election, in our country. And by the time this plays, we'll know how that all turned out. Today, nobody knows.
Hopefully, we'll know.
Yeah, hopefully, but unless you're planning to, well, who knows? Yeah, but so, but I think of C.S. Lewis, and one of his writings, the Weight of Glory, is one that made a really big impression on me. I won't quote it exactly, but he made this observation. He says, the dullest and most uninteresting person that you might meet on the street today will be someone who that one day you would be either strongly tempted to bow down and worship or recoil from in absolute horror, because we don't live among mere mortals, right? It's people who are immortals that are all around us, and we can become fixated on the kind of temporal issues that either unite or divide us. C.S. Lewis, by the way, his eyes glossed over when you started talking about politics. He was not interested. He was interested in eternity, in eternal questions, and recognized people as eternal beings. And I think that at the very front end of whatever else the church might do, it's important that we recognize everybody as someone loved by the Lord and for whom Christ died, and to treat them with love and respect, and hopefully reflect that love and light of Christ in our interactions with them.
Yeah, to treat them with dignity.
Indeed.
And that's such in short supply in the things that we see in our culture today. And yeah, everybody that we encounter is someone for whom Christ died.
Mm.
And if we forget that, then what are we doing as people in the church? That's got to be first and foremost. And I thank you for reminding me of that. You know, I get up in the pulpit pretty much every other week. I have a ministry team here at St. Matthew that I serve with, and that has to be at the front of my thinking. And sometimes I do. I get a little bit more in the navel gazing or even behind me gazing, and I
Sure.
forget that
Well,
these are people.
we all do, and then we, we will associate with, kind of the birds of the feather flock together with,
Yeah,
our own people, our own family, our own friends, and we'll develop negative perspectives about others, and these are the ones that Jesus asks us to reach out to.
right. Exactly right. So kind of the bring it a little bit, maybe a lighter
Okay.
tone to the kind of. You've had some time flying from Europe back and forth a little bit, and you're going to be flying down to South America. What are you reading? What's on your either your nightstand or in your Kindle reader right these days?
Well, yeah, I thought about this. I'll tell you about just three books that I'm wrapping up now uh, that I think are sort of reflective of kind of how my eclectic reading, mostly nonfiction stuff, but just finished a book by Jared Cohen called Life After Power. And it's a book about past US presidents who had meaningful post presidencies, and there were a variety of them, lots of different ones. But as a sort of freshly retired person, you want to kind of see how did those people respond to their new situation, circumstance. And so there are about seven or eight of them that and very different approaches to their post presidency. But a few of them I had also admired as their accomplishments after their years in office, and developed an appreciation for a few others after reading that book. So I certainly would recommend it for anybody who would like to know about those folks. I've also been reading a series by Princeton University Press. I don't know if it has a sort of subtitle, but it's kind of ancient wisdom for the modern age. It's selections of writings by philosophers of antiquity, Greek and Roman writers primarily. But I've been especially drawn and interested in the writings of some of the Stoic philosophers, particularly Seneca and Epictetus. Uh, Philosophy certainly no replacement for Christianity, but the kind of the object of ancient Greek philosophy anyway was how to live a good life, right? How to live a good life. It's not necessarily interested in metaphysical questions, although not uninterested in those. But what are the essential kind of components of a meaningful, happy life? And for the Stoics, they had these four virtues of wisdom, of temperance, of justice, and what am I missing? Courage. And so this was kind of a baseline. Christian writers built on that and added the Christian virtues of faith, hope, and love. But anyway, so these are kind of foundational sorts of elements. But I've also appreciated from the Stoics a few other things that have been helpful to me. One, this distinction between what we control and what we don't control, right? And we tend to spend a lot of time fretting about things that we can't or don't control, including things like our reputation. We don't control that. That's other people's. And what what are we going to do about that ultimately? Not worry about it. Just focus on wisdom, temperance, courage, justice, faith, hope, love. And anyway, it's been intriguing and challenging. The last one I read was by Seneca, How to Do the Right Thing. So that's right in that same category. And then the other one, Magisteria. I've just been working on this. It's by Nicholas Spencer. It's it's an examination of the historical relationship between science and religion. And, we think about the antagonism uh, that many will say characterizes Christianity and science in our age. But this goes way back and demonstrates that certainly has not always been the case. In fact, many of the leading scientists were also very devout Christians. But I think it's an important topic for us simply because so many young people today are part of their reason for not wanting to be engaged in Christianity is that they say that Christians are anti-science, and we have to wrestle with that and to understand, first of all, that science and religion ask different questions. They don't ask all the same questions. Science fundamentally about physical things, right? And ultimately, our religious interests are metaphysical, and they're outside of the realm of physics. And that if we could have a healthy conversation there rather than just this, again, antagonism, it's not easy because the debates have gone way back, right? Galileo with the kind of or Copernicus with the heliocentric solar system. The church really botched a lot of things there in some of those discussions, or the whole question about evolution, which in our time or in our own moment, how do we relate to AI and what does it mean to be human? And in some ways, all of those, that has been this central to the debate of all of those things. If the Earth is not the center of not only the solar system but the universe, what does that say about us as humans? Or if you say that we have some kind of evolutionary relationship with apes, what does that say about humans? Or if you in AI, if these robots suddenly become, what does that say about being human? And so these are important questions for us, for sure. But anyway, it's some of it. I'm not a science person per se, but it has been interesting to evaluate the relationship.
So I'm going to give you a billboard on a very major tollway or freeway. Here in Illinois, we got tollways, but and so millions of people are going to go by it pretty quickly, but every single day. What would you put on that billboard that this is the message? I only got half a second for them, but I want to get them a message. What's on that billboard for you?
Yeah, that's half second's not enough time to really go into any detail on anything, is it? So maybe I thought a little about this because you did ask me this in advance. Maybe I would buy two billboards, and one would be neither is original with me, but one that kind of motivates me is this sort of Nike "just do it," and this can involve a lot of things, but it's mainly the law, right? It's just the law. It's just we come up with lots of excuses not to do things that we could or should, and we are inclined to follow the path of least resistance wherever we can. And I think that might be a good sort of foundational but not ultimate billboard message, because the one right down the road would be something quoting not Aaron Rodgers, although he said it to Green Bay fans once upon a time: relax. And that was when the Packers had lost a couple games, and he didn't want everybody to get all worked up. But I think as Christians, that this is really important for us to do as well, to relax, to just do it, right? Run with perseverance the race that's laid out for you, right? It's a marathon. You got to get up, you got to get after, you got to keep go. You have this cloud of witnesses, these heroes of the faith who've done all this. Just do it, right? You got to do it, but relax, because ultimately the race has been won for us, right? That we cast our burdens upon Jesus. He bears them all and frees us from the accursed load, right? We have the victory already. We can breathe easy and exhale, and so run the race, but chill, because the result is already already won. So they probably need a little explanation, but maybe those would be a couple things I'd like to talk about.
There's some great truths in there. You were mentioning when you're talking about the books too, is we as humans, we have this, it's part of our, I believe, our sinful human nature, or at least it's shaped by it, of wanting to control something. We got to be in control. I got to hang on tight to that control. And Jesus just says, hey,
Yeah,
don't be anxious.
I've got this.
I've done this for you.
Yeah,
And it's very liberating once you can break through that
that's
of,
right.
I don't need to be in control anymore.
That's
So
right. Like it's all on me.
yeah,
It's not on me.
I'm
Yeah.
not so sure I like that you're quoting Brett Favre at that point, being a
No,
Bears
Aaron
fan
Rodgers, Aaron
myself.
Rodgers,
Aaron
Aaron
Rodgers,
Rodgers.
I'm a Bears fan myself, so
Oh, you are. Well, that's too
yeah.
bad.
But we'll give you the kudos that you
Okay.
deserve because the Packers have certainly, um,
Well, I'm not really a Packer fan either. I'm a
but
Broncos fan, so it's been a long, difficult stretch.
yeah, but you've got Peyton.
Yeah, we Peyton. Yeah, we haven't had a 500 year since we won the Super Bowl in 2015, though. So we're long suffering. Suffering produces endurance, right?
Yep. Perseverance,
Yeah,
character, and character hope. So,
yeah.
hey, as a historian, you want to, if you're going to have a dinner, what people either from history or maybe if it's a fictional characters, are you going to invite to this dinner up to three of them that you want to have a dinner with?
Yeah, I think I'll invite four because I don't think one will show up. So, and the first one is somebody that folks won't know, but maybe it would be a good, I'd invite him first and then he wouldn't come. His name is George Sheehan. And he was a medical doctor, lived in New Jersey, lived in the late 20th century, but he's also my running guru. He was used to write articles for Runner's World, and then he turned these into to books. And I read them and reread them a lot. He weaves together kind of philosophers and insights and perspectives. But I guess the thing I've gained most from George Sheehan is the idea that that we are that just because we're old, just because I'm old, doesn't mean I'm not an athlete. That I have to give, and I sort of bristle when I encounter people who say, "Oh, I used to be an athlete." Well, why? What do you mean? Why aren't you still an athlete? Doesn't mean you have to run marathons, by the way, but it means that God has given us these bodies to kind of help us through this life, and that being an athlete, at least for me, is a great joy, and it's something that I continue to enjoy, and I strive to be the best athlete that I can be. So I'd invite him, but I know that he said himself that when he went to dinner parties, he would usually slip off to the side and read a book rather than engage anyone. So, but he gives us a foundation because I from him I want to learn more about what it means to be an athlete, even as an old man. But it's not just an athlete. So I want to be also the best a spiritual athlete that I can be, following the example of the heroes of the faith, the saints that have gone before us. And I think I mentioned C.S. Lewis. I would certainly include him as someone who stimulates our thinking uh, about heaven, about Jesus in so many ways, creatively, literature, apologetics, uh, just would be a fascinating person to engage. So, spiritual athlete, uh, 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 physical athlete, body, spirit, but also then kind of intellectual athlete. So, who would I include at the dinner party that would challenge me to as an intellectual athlete? This is where I have to invite two. I was only going to invite one, but something came up today that made me think about another. The first one I thought of was Thomas Jefferson, and he's not very much in vogue right now because of some of his uh, personal life issues that it's a little bit anachronistic, but nevertheless, he deserves some criticism. I don't always agree with a lot of things that he stood for, either just apart from his personal life. But John F. Kennedy once quipped when he had a gathering of Nobel Prize winners uh, at a dinner. He said, "This is the greatest assembly of intelligence in the White House ever, with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined alone. And so he was this brilliant Renaissance person who visited Monticello a couple of years ago. But whether it was certainly politics or language or science or whatever the case may be, just an example of extraordinary brilliance. And I went to Jefferson High School, so I need to know a little more about that. So I thought about those three, but then today I remembered this quote from Albert Einstein, and I'm not a science person, by the way, so I don't know very much. I mean, I got a C in biology, and I barely passed physics. So but he once wrote to a friend that he says, we physicists know that there is no such thing as time, as past, present, or future. This is all connected to his theory of relativity. Don't ask me how. But he says, we know that there is no such thing as time, that it's this stubborn illusion. But there is no, and I just would love to know what he thought about that, because of course, as temporal beings, we not only think in those terms, past, present, future, but that sort of defines our reality in many ways. I'm an historian. We just went off daylight savings time. We're wondering about the future with the election, et cetera, et cetera. But as Christians, and again, quoting Lewis, we are eternal beings. We are eternal beings, and there will come a time when time is no longer relative. And what was Einstein's insight there that could give me a glimpse of that, maybe in a way that I don't have right now, because I'm a temporal creature such as I am.
Here's some, maybe you can't answer it, but I think it gives us some insight into who you are. What are you going to serve these people at your dinner?
Yeah, well, gosh, I didn't think about that one very much, because I'm not very good at that kind of thing. So, gosh, I have to come up with something, but I don't have it.
Well, you're in Texas, so
yeah, we can brisket, I guess.
there you go.
Yeah, we can brisket. Yeah, that would probably be all right. But obviously, it would be the conversation that would be the
Absolutely.
great. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, my thanks to you, Pat. I really do appreciate reconnecting with you after all these years and sharing your insights and your reflection of God's love to our listeners and viewers. Thanks so much, Pat.
Oh, it's been fun, and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you for joining me on today's episode. If you'd like to find out more, there are links in the show notes. And the Reflection Podcast is all about helping you to learn more about reflecting God's light and love. God loves you so much, and He sent Jesus to be your Savior. And now, in the followers of Jesus, God is reflected in this dark world. And the more that you reflect His love, the more people will know the love and the salvation of Jesus Christ. That's why we exist as a podcast. And your subscribing to the podcast, rating and reviewing it, leaving comments, helps push us out to more and more people so that they can know more about God and His light and love. Share this episode across your socials. That helps us get to more and more people as well. The Reflection Podcast is produced by St. Matthew Lutheran Church and Early Childhood Center in Hawthorne Woods, Illinois. To find out more about St. Matthew and our Early Childhood Center, our preschool, and our youth ministry and our worship services, you can go to our website at www.stmatts.net. That's basically just stmats.net. All our worship services are live streamed. Many of our Bible studies are, but you can also join us in person. We are in the northeast part of Illinois, just about an hour northwest of downtown Chicago, and almost less than an hour from O'Hare Airport. So if you find yourself in this neck of the woods, we'd love to see you. I hope that you will join me again next time for this podcast. Go back and listen to some of the previous episodes. There's some wonderful guests in the last 3 seasons, and a lot more wonderful guests coming up in the next episodes. So subscribe and stay tuned. I pray that God will richly bless you. Thank you again for joining me today, and I'll see you next time on the Reflection Podcast.